So thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedules to join the webinar today. I'll be discussing the factors that influence children's pursuit of and engagement in cross-race friendships and how parents, and more broadly, we as a society can encourage more cross-race friendships among children. So first of all, among adults, research shows that same-race friendships are more prevalent than cross-race friendships. So for example, this survey conducted by the Public Religion Research Institute, they actually asked the question, name people with whom you've discussed important matters. And they found that more than half of the people listed by white, Black, and Hispanic individuals were people of the same race. So this is likely the network these individuals consider part of their inner circle, and the majority of them are the same race as they are. So we have some information about adult friendship patterns, so what about children? Among children, research shows that as children age, cross-race friendships become less common and are less prevalent than same-race friendships. Additionally, a paper that I co-authored with Stephen Roberts and Susan Gelman showed that Black, white, and multiracial children ages 4 to 6 expect that Black and white target children, that is, children that they are looking at a screen and making judgments about, they expect those children to be friends with individuals who are of the same race as they are. So children believe that people will be friends with people who are the same race, and they also themselves are less likely to have friends who are of a different race, and the prevalence of these cross-race friendships decreases as children transition from early to middle childhood. So why does this matter? Why should we care that people want to be friends with people who are the same race as them? Well, it goes without saying that racial tensions in this country have become particularly strained, and the ways in which people think of various social issues is sharply divided along racial lines. So for example, on the issue of racism against Black people, the Pew Research Center found that 43% of Black people believe this country will not make the changes needed to give Black people equal rights to white people. Only 11% of white people believe this. On the other hand, 38% of white people believe the country has already made the changes needed to give Black people the same rights as white people, and only 8% of Black people believe this. So race, and more precisely racism, is still the problem that we all live with, but it's a problem that we don't talk about, and we're really not talking about it with people who are of a different racial background than we are. As demonstrated by the earlier graphic I showed, where people are generally having these conversations with people who are the same race as they are. On the positive side, cross-race friendships have demonstrable benefits. So for example, research among adults has found that having more cross-race friends can promote more positive racial attitudes, and also lowers feelings of discomfort when in interactions with people of a different race. With children, we know that cross-race friendships reduce feelings of vulnerability in the school context. And we know that cross-race friendships can also protect adolescents from the negative effects of school-based discrimination on feelings of loneliness, depressive symptoms, and school belonging. So basically what that means is that where discrimination would normally have a really negative impact on kids, like making them more lonely, when kids have cross-race friendships, they don't experience that link between discrimination they experience and being more lonely or having more depressive symptoms in the school context. So now that we've established that cross-race friendships are important, but that they're also rare, this begs the question of, well, how do we encourage more mutually beneficial cross-race friendships in childhood? So next I'm going to discuss a theory proposed by Bigler, Rohrbach, and Sanchez, which seeks to understand how cross-race friendships develop and influence racial attitudes. In the general intergroup friendship theory, or GIFT, we have a model in which the success of each process depends on the preceding process and influences the one after. So for example, cross-race friendships are dependent upon the success of interracial interactions, which in turn are dependent on the opportunity for and success of cross-race contact. On the other hand, positive cross-race friendships should promote more positive cross-race interactions, which should then promote the pursuit of more cross-race contact. Likewise, children's cross-race friendships may lead to improved racial attitudes, but racial attitudes should also lead to more high quality and the higher frequency of cross-race friendships. So this is a cyclical, bidirectional relationship in the way each process influences the next. So keeping that model in mind, today I'm focusing on the ways in which children's racial attitudes may influence the development of cross-race friendships. I'm also adding an additional component for this particular talk, exploring how parent behavior and attitudes may affect children's cross-race friendship development. So first, I'll discuss how children's racial attitudes relate to their race-based friendship choices. So first, research conducted at UT Austin by Bigler and Warbach found that in a sample of majority white children ages 4 to 6, those who felt more comfortable being in close proximity to Black individuals also behaved more comfortably and positively in a situation where they had the opportunity to actually interact with a Black person in a waiting room situation. In another study, Abood, Mendelson, and Purdy found that white children in grades 1 through 3 and 5 through 6 who expressed higher levels of prejudice, defined by feeling more positively toward the racial in-group than toward the racial out-group, had fewer cross-race companions and lower quality cross-race friendships. Interestingly, they did not find this link between Black children's in-group and out-group feelings and the number or quality of cross-race companionship and friendship. And I have some thoughts about why that might be, and we can of course discuss that if people are interested in the Q&A. Finally, I'm going to discuss very quickly a study that I conducted with my colleague, Dr. Rebecca Bigler at UT Austin, in a 3 majority Hispanic schools and 1 majority white school. These children were ages 5 to 11, and the majority of our sample was in fact Latino. We told them that they would be asked to participate in a pen pal program because we wanted to understand how kids develop friendships. And we didn't tell them anything about race at this point because we didn't want that to affect the choices that they made. We showed them 24 photos of kids, including 4 Black girls, 4 Black boys, 4 Latino boys, 4 Latina girls, 4 white boys, and 4 white girls. And we told them that these were all kids from another classroom in Austin. Children were asked to choose 4 possible pen pals to write a letter to, and we told them that we would try to match them with their top choice. Following the pen pal procedure, we asked children questions related to their racial attitudes, so including questions assessing their attribution of positive and negative characteristics to individuals of different racial groups, so one group is bad or one group is good. We also asked children about how happy they would be to have people of different racial groups as doctors, friends, babysitters, and this is that proximity measure that I talked about being related to children's comfort with people of a different racial background. We preliminarily found that children who attributed more positive characteristics to Black people as a whole were then more likely to seek Black people to be pen pals with. So those kids chose more Black people in their 4 pen pal choices at the beginning of our study. So the question becomes, how do we promote these attitudes in children, and how can parents encourage such attitudes while also encouraging cross-race friendships? The first study I'll talk about was conducted by Palki, Bigler, and Suizo. They found that among white families, parents' own racial attitudes did not relate to their 4 to 5-year-old children's racial attitudes. And parents and children weren't very good at predicting each other's racial attitudes. So they asked kids to predict their moms, and they asked moms to predict their kids, and there wasn't a lot of relationship there. However, parents who themselves had more friends of a different racial background also had children who felt more comfortable or attributed more positive and negative traits. They were less racially biased, sorry. They were less likely to attribute negative traits to the out-group, attribute positive traits to the in-group. So they were basically more neutral in their attributions. And this is important that because I just noted in our study, we found that when children who attributed more positive traits to Black people, they were more likely to pick a Black pen pal. So basically, parents' behaviors are indirectly affecting their children's behaviors through children's attitudes. In another study, Warbach and Bigler found similar results, which showed that parent attitudes did not predict children's attitudes. However, the number of Black individuals in parents' social networks did predict children's proximity ratings, so their happiness with having a Black person or as a doctor or a friend or something like that. Again, this is important because note that in the same study, children's proximity ratings were related to their treatment of a Black person in a waiting room situation. And finally, interestingly, in the study that I did at UT, we preliminarily found parents took a survey and we explored the ways in which their own racial attitudes predicted their children's. And interestingly, found a correlation in which parents whose children had seen them kiss a Black person had children who felt happier having a Black person in close proximity. And we didn't find this correlation with white or Latino proximity ratings, which I find really interesting, and I have some thoughts about that. But again, I can address that in the Q&A and the discussion. So to recap, cross-race friendships among parents and kids are rare, and cross-race friendships are beneficial, but cross-race friendships are beneficial to white kids and kids of color. And so the question becomes, how do we increase their prevalence in childhood when such friendships may be most effective in promoting racial attitudes? And so we also found that children who have more cross-race friends have more positive racial attitudes, they feel more positively toward Black people, and we can think about how this might be extrapolated to other groups as well. And they have parents who have intimate relationships with people of a different racial background. And so again, I think what this really demonstrates is that parents, what they are reporting that they're believing aren't having a huge impact on their children's attitudes, but their modeling, what their children are seeing, those things are having an effect on their attitudes. And those attitudes then lead them to have more positive relationships with people of different racial backgrounds. And it also leads them to pursue those relationships as well. Okay, so I think this might be a good time to take a break and look at if people have questions. Melissa and Andrew, I'm not sure where.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Amber. And for sure, folks, if you have any questions here, we'll probably only take a couple questions because Amber's going to get to the part that we know a lot of people are especially interested in, just judging from the questions that we got in the registration process, right, which is what do you do about it? Mm-hmm. But did want to take a quick break here to invite any questions, and certainly I have actually a couple, but let me ask just one for starters, which is, we have a friend who is an education professor and does a lot of work on segregation in schools, segregation, racial and ethnic segregation, integration in schools. And she did work, as far as I know, the first study of segregation at the preschool level, and found that indeed there is significant segregation, certainly white from kids of color, white kids from kids of color. And you would think, we suppose intuitively that kids who grew up in racially segregated, racially isolated environments are going to be, that's likely to have a negative impact in itself on racial attitudes toward other kids from other racial groups. And I'm wondering though, if we actually have that evidence, whether at the school level or the classroom level or whatever it may be.
Right, so there actually, I just came back from a conference where I was a part of a symposium that focused on how the environment affects children's racial attitudes, their beliefs about race-related friendships and race-based relationships. And some of the findings are basically that, yes, segregation it wasn't as, they looked at basically a lab experiment where they showed kids neighborhoods that were differing in terms of their segregation. And they asked kids, who's going to be friends with this child, or who is this child friends with, this person or this person? And they saw, people in the different houses. And they found that it did affect the extent to which kids believed that people would be friends of people of a different racial background, depending on where they lived. And so, at least in a lab situation, that is definitely having an effect. There is some other recent work that I'm looking at where they look at actual kids in communities in diverse communities, and I can definitely link to that article. I haven't read it completely myself, but my hunch is that it absolutely, I mean, kids are very, they're very observant. And so a lot of the things that we think about when we think about race, and this is how race differs from gender, is that race is we don't talk about it in a way that we do talk about kind of gender expectations. We don't talk about race. And so a lot of the things that kids learn about race are from observations of who has more or where do people live. And so, I mean, I think, you know, at least that research does have, you know, preliminary implications for how segregation is influencing this.
Yeah, did you want
to? There are some questions. No, you go ahead. I'm
so let me ask just one more question, which you know, certainly anticipates the what you do about it question, but does come out of the research findings that you offered there, Amber, which is, you know, the way I sort of distill some of what you said is that, you know, what kids see will be much more important than what you say. Now, what you say as a parent, let's say, or as a teacher, is a little bit of an extrapolation from your saying, you know, parents' attitudes, right, didn't correspond to children's attitudes, but, you know, kissing a Black person or, you know, who they see in your friendship circle, right, the family's friendship circle will be more important. And I assume that what people say will be related to their explicit attitudes, right? So it sounds like, you know, what the kids see is more important than what the parents may say to the children. And yet, you know, certainly in our work and in, you know, the conversations lots of people are having about race in kids and how we, you know, sort of nurture kids who are anti-racist and so on, you do hear a lot of people sort of boiling it down to talking to kids, right? Talking to kids. So I just wonder if you have anything to say, and again, you can tell me to just hang on because you're about to get to it, but anything to say about, you know, what are the implications of that? I mean, is that right, that talking to kids in fact matters much, much less than what they see, or is there some sort of complicated relationship between the two?
I think that for these studies, and I see someone had asked a question, well, I think they feel like it was answered, but I do want to kind of address, because I can understand how some of that was a little confusing. I presented a lot of information. Someone asked, they didn't really understand the racial differences in terms of like how kissing a Black person is related. So just to really like recap, the whole idea is that particularly we find this relationship with Black kids, even when we're like measuring how they feel about other groups, we're finding that how parents treat Black people, whether parents are in friendships with Black people, has a particular effect on how kids think about Black people, which then leads them to want to or not want to be friends with Black people. So in the kissing Black people, it means if your child has seen you kiss a Black person, and that can be familially, we told families familially, it can be romantic, it can be friendly. If your child has seen you do that, they feel more comfortable. They say that they report feeling happier having a Black person as their potential doctor, their potential next door neighbor. So basically it's that proximity. They're happier to have a Black person in proximity to them. So I just wanted to answer that. And to what you were saying, I think my work is, the work that I'm presenting here is showing more that how parents are thinking. I think, and we see this a lot with white parents, but parents of color are also dealing with this. Parents don't want to talk about race because they feel like it will make their kids racist, but they feel like if I'm not racist, my kid's not going to be racist. And so we're really measuring these attitudes, these beliefs, not necessarily what they're saying to their kids, but what they're thinking. And what we found is that children are not knowing what their parents are thinking, and parents are not knowing what their kids are thinking. So I think it's not necessarily to say that parents and their kids don't, like, talking to your kids is not effective. I think it's just not happening, and people are assuming that they're transmitting their attitudes just yeah, I don't know how they would transmit their attitudes, but I think there's an assumption that if I don't say anything, and I think it's a well-meaning assumption, but it's in the face of a society that is so race conscious and racist in many ways. kids are getting these answers elsewhere if they're not talking to their parents. And if they see their parents don't have friends of a different race, they assume, well, we're not friends with those people. That's kind of the way the world is. That's their observation. And so, yeah, that would be my answer to that.
So, Amber, I have a follow-up on that, and then I promise I'll let you finish your presentation. Which is that you said that you had some ideas about why, you know, kissing a Black person had an effect if kids saw it, as opposed to other races it didn't have an effect.
Yeah, so a couple of things. My thinking about that is the anti-Blackness in society is just particularly salient. And that is not to say that kids are not hearing messages about Latino or Hispanic kids. It's just when I talk to the kids, I notice that they don't know what those terms are. I have to explain what those terms mean. I think when kids think about Latino or Hispanic, they're really thinking about people who are Mexican, particularly where we were. So we were in South Texas. So for them, they are Latino, but they don't really identify that way. And so, you know, they identify as Mexican or El Salvadorian or Honduran. And so they're not thinking in those terms. So I think that there's probably a disconnect with the Latino because that's not how they're thinking about those people. They're not really thinking about them as a group of people. They're more thinking of it in terms of nationality and language. But Blackness in this country, I think, is very salient for all kids. And we heard this when kids would talk. We asked them questions and they would say, yeah, like my peers said I couldn't be friends with a Black person, or Black people are discriminated against, or my family doesn't like Black people, or we heard a lot of that. So I think that it's a particularly powerful idea in society, given the history of the US and given what's going on, you know, currently. And so I think it's particularly powerful for kids to see their parents embrace a group that is not embraced by the society at large. And so I think that's having a particular connection for them.
Thank you, Amber. Yeah, so we will let you get back. I just want to note to everyone listening and watching that the big takeaway is if you want to do right by your kids, you should kiss me, right?
You're going to expect a lot of kisses.
I think that's,
I would.
That's understood.
Yeah.
Okay, please.
All right. Okay, so one of the major things that I kind of recommend before you get started going and kissing the first Black person you see is to educate yourself. So making sure that you are able to knowledgeably and authentically build relationships with a deeper knowledge of the social and historical factors that make such relationships difficult will make you and your child better able to engage in meaningful, affirming friendships with people of a different race. And for white parents, I think this means being aware of the ways in which such friendships can be burdensome to children of color if they involve a lot of education of white children around issues of racism and privilege. So for you, this can involve educating yourself on those issues so that you can provide developmentally appropriate information about current and historical racism and discrimination to your child. And this way, when your child has questions, and they can feel comfortable coming to you if they have, you know, concerns or issues. And for parents of color, this also means being aware of the different privileges and concerns that your child brings to the table. So this could include, like I discussed just now, anti-Blackness and colorism, and or issues of documentation. So knowing about these issues can help you talk to your child about the struggles and concerns they may be facing, about accepting and affirming themselves as well as others. So there are a lot of issues to consider when encouraging cross-race friendships for you and your child, and being educated about these different kind of concerns and how to discuss them with your kids can be particularly helpful in addressing these issues as they come up. I suggest starting with this excellent podcast by The Liturgists, which focuses on, it does focus on Black-white relations in the US, but it's, I think, really, there's a lot of ways in which you could expand this to the experiences of all people of color in struggling to have this kind of feeling of acceptance in a world that devalues you in some ways. And it is a podcast that focuses on Christianity, but even if you're not from a different religious background or not religious at all, I feel it's a really illuminating and important podcast. It's a great place to start, and you can do it. I listen to it on my commute. It's just wonderful. And at the link, there are some suggested readings by, for example, Bell Hooks and other activists. And those can be a starting point for thinking about race in America more broadly. So I wanted to provide some suggested reading, and these are some good books that I would personally start with. I'm actually currently reading the Anti-Bias Education in Early Childhood Classrooms book. It is geared toward education and teachers, but having read it, I think it is very much applicable for parents in thinking about ways to address issues of racial bias when they come up. What happens if your child says something that is racist or toward another group? How do you address it, and how do you incorporate kind of anti-bias and multiculturalism in the home as well as in the classroom? So I think it's really a good book, and it focuses not just on race, but it also talks about family diversity, socioeconomic status, and other issues that children come to when they are in the classroom. And Beverly Tatum's Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria is a really easy to read and very engaging book. She talks about socialization techniques you can use at different stages. So for example, she talks specifically about discussing slavery with really young children who may be concerned about their safety after learning about it. And so it really provides, how to kind of address those kinds of issues with your kid in ways that are, again, developmentally appropriate. Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me is written as a letter from Coates to his son, and it talks about the struggles of being a Black man in America. I've not read it myself, but Coates is a brilliant writer. I've read so many of his articles, and this book has won a lot of awards, so I feel really comfortable recommending it. And finally, We Too Sing America is a review of the discrimination faced by especially Southeast Asian, Muslim, and Sikh individuals. But it also talks about issues of documentation, Black Lives Matter, and so basically it talks about kind of those issues, and so it gives you a history of those movements and involvement in it, and how those really amplify or exemplify the American experience. And these books are, of course, starting points, and I'll provide a more comprehensive list for distribution to Andrew and Melissa very soon. And then the second tip is, of course, diversify your friendship network. So much of the work that has been conducted, as I noted, as we just talked about, on parents' influence of on children's race-related attitudes, finds that there is no relationship between how parents think their children feel and how they feel about race, and how their children think their parents feel and they feel about race. And so, but parents' behaviors, what they do, namely the diversity of their friendship networks, has been shown to have a positive influence on children. And so children are observing what their parents model. Along with this, diversifying your child's environment is also really important. So making sure that your child has plenty of opportunity for cross-race contact is an important aspect of getting them used to and more knowledgeable about the lives of people who don't look like them. So you may be asking, how do I do this? Segregation is the norm in the US, and this makes cross-race contact really difficult. And my answer to that is, yeah, it is difficult, and you have to be really intentional. You likely have to go outside of your neighborhood and perhaps go to your local Boys and Girls Club. Boys and Girls Club is an organization that I've worked with in my research, and it's a very diverse organization, and I think it'd be a great organization if you want to enroll your child in some kind of after-school program. And one caveat to this, I will say, is be careful about asserting yourself in spaces that are meant solely for people of color or for those particular communities. And be careful not to exoticize communities in their spaces. And so bringing your child, for example, you could bring your child to another park outside of, your regular community, after school programs that serve diverse children, or even community-based language learning. Those might be a good place to start doing that research. And I'll say there's no real easy answer to know what spaces might be the most appropriate. Some of this is trial and error. I would say feel free to ask community liaisons. I think so much of this is we're not direct enough when it comes to race. I think we're constantly speaking in code. And so just asking a community liaison, hey, is this appropriate for my child to be in this space? Or is this somewhere where you all, is this a safe space for for the people in the community? And don't let the fear of making a mistake paralyze you. So educate yourself, and when you make a mistake, apologize and commit to do better. And that's really all any of us can do. Additionally, being knowledgeable of and supporting school integration initiatives in your district is really important. Know what's going on with the schools, know what's going on with the busing, any organizations that are trying to basically increase the quality of public schooling, particularly for kids who are low income and kids who are kids of color. Become involved in your local politics. Know the issues around districting, gentrification, and advocate for affordable integrated schools. There's a saying that all politics is local, and after the election, when I was in Texas, I became really involved in local politics, and it was such a learning experience for me. There's so much going on, and so becoming aware of those issues and fighting for the right to quality education for all students is, I think, really important for the more structural long-term goal. So while you're doing that and fighting the good fight, another way to kind of diversify your child's understanding of the world, sometimes, like I was telling Andrew and Melissa, I live in San Luis Obispo. I have to drive 2 hours to find a majority Black community. So sometimes it's just not feasible to regularly expose your child to different groups of people, whatever that group might be, given your location in the US. And that's where media, books come in an effort to kind of expose your child to people who look different from them. These books that focus on children of color often make references to historical discrimination and hardships faced by people of color. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think those books are very important. But it's also important to have books that portray diverse children normatively living their lives. Exposure to children who look different, but have the same joys and struggles and concerns and happiness as other families, allows your child to see both the differences and the commonalities that they have with other children, and I think that's really important. And this means also thinking critically about the media that you allow your child to consume. So one challenge that you can do immediately is next time your child's watching TV, look at the characters. Are there any characters of color present? Are they there? Is the person of color always a sidekick? Are any of the protagonists, the main characters, people of color? Are dark-skinned people always portrayed as villains? I think we underestimate the extent to which children are really internalizing these images. So try to see these as opportunities for discussion and also opportunities to steer children toward shows that portray children of color in positive ways. And these are some books I would suggest as a starting point. So Lola Goes to the Library is just a normal book about a Black girl who goes to the library. I believe there's a series of Lola books. I bought this one for my goddaughter, and I think she really liked it. Separate is Never Equal is the story of Sylvia Mendez, a little girl whose family filed a lawsuit to end segregation in California 10 years before Brown v. Board of Education. And they won the law. And the law affected more than 5,000 Latino children in desegregated California schools. So I didn't know about that story, and I think it's something that really interesting to talk to kids about. And it opens the door to talking about, what happened in the past and how kids have, and encouraging kids that they have the power to change things as well. And this is the story, along with that, of Malala Yousafzai. Many of you probably have heard of this brave young girl who stood up for girls' rights to quality education in Pakistan. And so, as I mentioned, there's nothing wrong with exposing children to issues of discrimination. I think that's a really important part of this kind of curriculum at home, but also, again, showing the more normative lives of kids of color is really important as well. And I'll be including other books in the list that I provide Andrew and Melissa. And I also believe they already have a list of children's books that parents have contributed. So that's also probably a very good source for parents looking for books that reflect children's lives and their own lives as well. And finally, it's important that children feel comfortable talking to their parents about questions they have about race. If they feel comfortable discussing these things with you, then you'll have the opportunity to shape their attitudes in ways that promote egalitarianism and equity. Often when kids mention something about race, especially in public, parents shush their kids or tell them to be quiet or talk in really hushed tones. And this sends a very powerful message to kids that talking about race is bad, and just talking about race makes someone racist. So Dr. Kristen Pocker conducted a study where she had children come in and play the Guess Who game. I'm sure many of you have seen this, where you have to guess who the person is, and there's a card in the front. And so you ask questions like, does the person have a hat on? Does he have glasses? And so Dr. Pocker basically varied the individuals by race, clothing color, and gender. And kids readily eliminated the choices based on clothing color and gender. However, when it came down to narrowing the options between, for example, a white man and a black man, children would not ask about his race, even if it meant losing the game. And I've seen the videos of this, and they're kind of hilarious in a very sad way, where kids are basically like just staring at it. It's just so obvious, but they just will not say it. And in one case, a dad who'd been there for, a while trying to figure out how to say it without saying it, he said, is the person black or white? And the kid looks at his dad and, you're racist. And so again, kids are really getting this message that just talking about race is a racist thing. And similarly, in my own work, I've interviewed kids where we've sorted photos by race and asked kids to guess how we sorted them. And I've had at least children say, I know the answer, but I can't say. And so I say, it's okay to say the answer. You can tell me, how did I sort them? And they say, no, they refuse to say. And so I end up, telling them, well, I sorted them by race. And they're like, that's what I was going to say. I just didn't think I could say that. And so kids are really getting this message. And I think it's really problematic, because if you're not talking to your kids about these issues, someone else is. And whether it's more subtle messages that they're getting in the media, more explicit messages they're getting at school through peers, those messages can really internalize negatively for your kids, even the way they think about others and the way they think about themselves. So open and honest communication with kids on these issues, I think, is really important, because again, it allows you to shape their attitudes in ways that are, again, promoting of equity and egalitarianism. And I do just want to quickly thank Dr. Rebecca Bigler, who was my postdoc advisor and helped me a lot in this work, Chantal Ramirez, who's a grad student at UT, the NSF, who funded the work that I did at UT, and EmbraceRace, and Andrew and Melissa for having me. I'm really honored to be here. Thank you. And these are the references that I have, that I referenced throughout the paper.
Great. Thank you so much, Amber. And we will send you after this, give us a week, the recording and a lot of resources mentioned here and other things we can think of, including Amber's been generous with her slides as well. So we'll send up, you guys have lots of questions, and you sent in a lot before this. So let me start with one, Amber. So a mother, Jennifer, has a 4-year-old who is multiracial Salvadorian Taiwanese, and she has a pretty diverse friend group at the moment, but she's already wondering how and when these friendships will start to dissipate due to racial and or cultural differences.
So her 4-year-old has a diverse group of friends.
And she says that she herself personally experiences tension in kindergarten, and she's wondering if she has to engage these other kids that her child is friends with, parents, in intentional talks about the value of cross-racial friendship.
Okay, so let me just clarify. So she's wondering when those friendships start to fall off, basically?
Yeah,
and whether the part was,
and what she can do, yeah.
Oh, okay, sure. So it starts, I think, in about late elementary school. The study that I referenced earlier was children in grades 1 through 3 and then children in grades 5 through 6. And I think she looked at that continuously, so I can't say like where the cutoff was, but I would guess about 5th, older elementary school, when they, and this is the point where they really start to understand race. So they, interestingly, as they get older, not only are they reducing the number of cross-race friends they have, but they're also starting to look on paper, report less biased attitudes, but their implicit attitudes stay the same. So they're starting to know it's not culturally appropriate for me to be racist, but I'm still acting in these ways that I don't think are racist, but are separating me from people who don't look like me. And I think in terms of what to do about avoiding that is, the way we think about raising children in developmental psychology is a lot of positive reinforcement. So I know my advisor, Dr. Bigler, her big thing is, parents are not explicit enough. And, saying, I'm glad that you have friends who are diverse and, you have friends that look like you and you have friends that don't look like you. Like, I really like that. And so talking to them, being explicit about, positive reinforcement, I think is helpful. In terms of what the other kids are doing, if you feel comfortable enough, I think it's good to talk to the parents about this, talk to the teachers about this. I think more schools are becoming aware of issues of diversity in their schools. The schools that I've spoken to are very concerned, but a lot of them don't have the tools. They don't know what to do about it. And so even if you implement a book circle with some of the parents and say, hey, let's read this anti-bias education book. I think, it's really important. I think people are starting to understand how important these issues are, particularly in the political situation we find ourselves in. So people might be more open to having those conversations and thinking about ways to encourage those attitudes in their kids.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Amber. And we've there's another set of questions that I'm going to pair two that we've gotten together because we've actually gotten several questions on both of these, and you've touched on them. But one is this question about, if you grew up in a racially isolated community, or school, right? So how do you promote friendships with kids who are not, right, part of that majority community? And then the other one is, how do you promote authentic friendships, which of course is something that you raised as well. And those two often go together, right? The dilemma is, it's a 95%, typically white, but certainly there are other communities that can be isolated, Black communities certainly, Latino in some cases, where, maybe there's literally one kid, right? Or there are a handful of kids who are not the majority identity. And then you can reach out to them, but it feels inauthentic, or you worry that you are tokenizing or appearing to tokenize, right? If you invite over, repeatedly that one kid to play dates and so on. So we have a number of questions about, and I'll just say, you had said earlier, certainly with younger kids, that's where books and popular culture may come in terms of some kind of exposure. But in terms of real friendships, what do you do?
And what's the burden you were referring to, if you could expand on the burden of these friendships for kids of color, people of color?
Yeah, so I think that in terms of the first question, I mean, it's really difficult when you live in like a very isolated town. But I think, again, you can be intentional about the types of places you travel to. So one of the questions that we have is kind of, how much do you value diversity? Do you value it over kind of how close the community center is to your house, or these other different things? And I think just making sure that if diversity is something that you're really invested in, knowing that it does take a bit more in the country that we live in, it takes more effort. So for example, if I had a kid, I do not have a child, but one of my biggest concerns moving here was, when I do end up parenting, I'm concerned about having kids that don't see themselves reflected in the city that I live in. And one of the things that I think I would definitely do is I would travel to LA and San Francisco as much as possible. And I know that's not feasible for all parents, but if it is feasible for you, making sure that, when you do have vacations or when you have opportunities to travel, that you're providing your children with an enriched experience, particularly if there's no one who looks like them, because then there's the danger not only of not being friends with people who look like them, but also how they feel about themselves. If they don't see themselves reflected in the world, that can really affect how they feel about themselves. So I would say, doing as much as possible to go, if you have to go out of your way, sometimes it's worth it to expose your child to people who look different. And I think in those cases where you can't do that, you really can't do that, I do think that media is really effective. The other thing is that what I did and kind of what we talked about yesterday is pen pal programs. There is a pen pal program that I saw, and I mentioned it a couple of days ago, but I want to look into it, where the point was a diversity pen pal thing. And I'm sure they have ones that are like technologically savvy so that kids can kind of be more interested in it. I know kids these days, like when we ask kids, like, do you know what a pen pal is? None of them knew. Like maybe 1% knew. So doing something like that might be another option. And then in terms of the parents, the burden on children of color, that's something that I think about a lot, because a lot of the work that is currently available is focusing on making white kids less racist. That's just the way people think about cross-race friendships. And I think that is really unfortunate. As somebody who grew up in a very, I grew up in a diverse neighborhood, but I went to a school that was majority white. And it felt isolating at times. People would make jokes and things like that. And I was at the point where I knew something was wrong, but I wasn't sure what. And it really led to my research today. And so I really identify with that question. And I think the important thing is, again, talking to your child not only like about themselves and making sure that they know there's nothing wrong with you, that you have a strong history. So there's some research about racial socialization with young children that shows that with Black kids who are racially socialized to feel positively they see images of themselves in the home, so they see artifacts or Afrocentric artifacts, they actually do better in reading. They're actually doing better cognitively in school. And so making sure that you're racially socializing your child around, racial pride and feeling good about themselves as kids of color is really important and can have a really good impact on them. And in terms of their friendships, letting them know that, it is not their job to educate people. I think at the intersection of being Black and being a woman, I'm always feeling bad for other people and always, spend a lot of time educating and doing all of these things, and it's draining. And I really tried to reinforce to myself, and I thought to myself literally this weekend, I'm going to tell my child that like their sanity is more important than like other people's discomfort. Like you don't have to give of yourself constantly in friendships that are not beneficial to you. And so making sure that your child knows that they don't have to be anyone's primary educator. Another thing on the other hand, I know Andrew had said something about white, not wanting to tokenize kids of color. If you're a white parent and you're concerned about that, again, I think educating your child on those issues is really important. And I think when it comes to how do you authentically make friendships, it's not like you have to jump through a lot of these hoops. Like think about when you're friends with someone you love dearly, who you go to. How did that friendship develop? You don't want to have people asking, oh, what are you? Like, where are you from? Where are you really from? Picking at your life like it's some kind of, like you're a zoo animal or something like that. You don't want people treating you, you want people to treat you as human. Like there are friends I have that I didn't know their racial background or something important about their lives until months down the line. And I never asked because I was getting to that person as a human being. I don't need to, pry about things that are really personal. And so building that trust, just letting people know you're there. I think inviting kids to things is great. Even if they're not coming, I want to be invited to things, even if I don't go, because I think that makes kids feel included, regardless of their racial background. So I don't think there's anything wrong with continually inviting someone, but I think it's in the way in which you talk to someone, and just really going by kind of the golden rule and treating people as you would want to be treated. So, yeah.
Yeah, so Amber, we have so many questions and not much time, but let me sort of combine some, and Beverly Daniels Tatum would be happy about this question, or maybe not happy, but so a parent says that her son who's a child of color, has drifted away from the white friends he had in elementary school. He's now in middle school. Should she ask him about it? Should she encourage friendship with white children in his group of friends, if his group of friends is colored and diverse? So it says colored diverse, but of diverse colors.
Right.
Sorry. See, we all
Color diverse. Yeah.
Color diverse. So I guess it's back to the why are all the Black kids sitting together in the cafeteria? Yeah. And is that something to worry about if your child is looking for more color, at that age, just as middle school, as a person of color?
Right. I feel very, I think that, yeah. So I would ask, I wouldn't ask in a way that is accusatory though. Like, why don't you have any white friends? Like, I would just be like, oh, I noticed, did something happen, or how do you feel? Because I know, like, for me, I went to a PWI, predominantly white institution for undergrad. I had had a lot of white friends before that. I'd been in majority white settings, and I literally went into college like, I want to be friends with everybody. Like, I'm not just a Black person, like, blah, blah, blah. And I was, in my attempt to do that, I felt completely ignored. Like, I tried to, it was like I wasn't there in so many ways. And I would be in multiple situations where I felt invisible. People would say racist things to me. I had a roommate who said a lot of racist, and it was just like exhausting. It was an exhausting experience. That's when I started going to the Black Student Association meetings, and I felt like it was just such a wonderful experience. And I don't think that it made me, less race conscious or anything like that, but in a world in which some kids are not educated in these issues, being around people who look like you can be a solace. And so talking to the child about that, like, why is that happening? You might discover that there's, that person just doesn't feel like they fit in with white people. And, just, I think at that point, I hesitate to put the burden on kids of color to reach out to people who are not making them feel. I think just telling them to be open to people, that are authentic and are trying and are, educated in these issues is important, but not forcing them to be friends with kids who might be, not recognizing their value in that way. Which I think is why we really do need, and I think that's why the research focuses on white kids in some ways, because they really because the burden has so continuously been on kids of color and people of color to kind of be more open, whereas now I think it's shifting to, well, how can we make white kids more understanding of these issues too? And so I think that's why the focus is there. Mm-hmm. But I would ask, I think it's always a good thing to just make sure your child knows that, especially in adolescence, when they're definitely noticing these things. So make sure that they know that they can talk to you about stuff that's going on.
Okay, and so we have a lot of questions here that we're going to stop now, but we can ask Amber for some recommendations. And I would definitely recommend, as she did, why are all the Black kids sitting in the cafeteria, for ideas about not only sort of the normal racial identity development, sort of the stage of wanting to be like people who look like yourself, but also for ideas for parents, teachers, for how to sort of create more authentic relationships or help kids find likenesses across race, right? Because we emphasize those differences, but there are a lot of, as you said, Amber, how did you meet the friends that you have, right? There are interests that people have in common and that kind of thing. So this was really wonderful. We're going to send you lots of resources. We're going to try to answer some more of these questions. But for now, we're leaving you, and we're very thankful to have had Amber on, and for all of your questions and community and all of your answers as well in the chat.
Yep. And remember, we will be back next time, the 4th. I don't even know what day of the month it is, but the 4th Tuesday at 8:30, we'll be back. Amber, thank you so much, and thanks for everyone who participated. Yeah. Till next time.
Go to EmbraceRace.org. Thanks, guys.
Yes, thank you. And I'll also provide my email address, so people have burning questions, they can email me.
Man, okay, this is amazing. Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.